It's an image that containing text that I wrote in 2018, August 8th, 2018, called Make Vancouver Canadian Again. I'm going to read it sentence by sentence, but then I'm going to comment. So I'll read a sentence or maybe two sentences from what I wrote in 2018, and then I will comment, because there's been it's provoked a lot of reaction, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding of what I'm saying in it. So let me just try to explain more of what I had in mind when I was writing this. Okay, so it's called Make Vancouver Canadian Again. Obviously, that is a play on Trump's slogan, Make America Great Again. I wrote this in the summer of 2018, during the mayoral election for Vancouver. So the city of Vancouver was having a big election for who was going to replace the mayor, the outgoing mayor of Gregor Robertson, and also all the other city council members. Like, it was a city council election, and quite a contentious one, because there was going to be a shift in power. And it was 2018, so it was in the Trump era, and all the candidates, there were so many mayoral candidates. It was like such a huge list. It was kind of a joke. But they were all coming out with their slogans, right? And so I commented somewhere on the internet, here's what would be my slogan if I was running, but I'm not running, so, you know, anybody who is running is free to use this. That is what I said, and, you know, you don't even have to pay me royalties. You can have it. Nobody took me up on my offer. But that was the spirit. Okay, so that's what was behind the original. My hair is so annoying. That was what was behind the original Make Vancouver Canadian Again idea, just with that slogan in itself. And then this is expanding upon, this thing that I wrote in August 2018 is expanding upon that. Okay, and now today I'm going to expand on what I wrote. Okay, so here we go. Trump is an American patriot and a beacon of hope to all around the Western world who cherish truth, liberty, and God. I am a Canadian whose ancestors go back 400 years in Canada and the USA, and who is a direct descendant of Samuel Purdy of the Purdy House in White Plains, New York, and the Planters. Okay, so let me expand on that. Yeah, so Samuel Purdy, like, I traced my genealogy, and this is through on my dad's side. And his family has lived in New Westminster, BC, going back to the 1800s. Okay, and there was only a few families here at that time, and the Purdy family was one of them. And so I come from that family, among others, in New Westminster in the 1800s. And the Canadian ones, the ones in Vancouver, in New Westminster, would come from this guy, Captain Reuben Purdy, and I believe he came to New West, BC, Canada, via California. But then his ancestors, like, I've traced his ancestry back, all the way back to this guy, Samuel Purdy, whose house in White Plains, New York, during the American Revolution, okay, was used as George Washington used it as the headquarters for the American Revolution for a time. That's what it says on Wikipedia. And it's a tourist site. I've never been there. I've never been to New York. But I've looked about it on the internet when I found out that I have this ancestral connection. And so that was one of my great-great-great-grandfather's houses, and it was used as the headquarters for the American Revolution. So it just goes to show that I have American Revolutionary blood flowing through my veins. Okay? And, yeah. And I guess also I wanted to say, I guess it's also an example of how lots of the people who come from New Westminster, okay? So this is something you have to understand. Vancouver, there's not very many people who are from Vancouver, period. Like, who from a long time back, who for many generations. Most people are quite relative newcomers, either immigrants themselves or first generation, second generation. Whereas I'm like sixth generation, which is unusual. But the thing is, there was, in the old days, like back in the 1800s, there was Vancouver and there was New Westminster, and they were two separate cities. And New Westminster was bigger, and it was actually the capital for a while of the province. And New Westminster was more working class and more American. So there were a lot of Americans who settled in New Westminster at that time. And generally they would have been coming this way following the gold rush from California. Okay, and that would have been the case with my ancestor, Reuben Purdy. So just a little bit of background. Okay, so people think, and I guess just that would be important as to, like, because people think there's such a huge difference between Canadians and Americans. But really, like, when I talk about my American cousins, like, I'm not just using that as just throwing that term around. Like, it literally is true. Like, I must have distant cousins all across the United States. And, okay, whereas historically, so that's New Westminster, had more of an American past, and Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, had more of an upper class British past, okay? So that is just, there's this historic distinction, and it's carried all the way through, even to now. There's like, I mean, there's a huge, I'm going to get into completely off topic when I start talking about that. But it informs urban geography and urban politics in Metro Vancouver to this day. This split between Vancouver and, like, New Westminster, also throwing into that Surrey and, like, the edge cities, edge suburbs. Okay. I don't want to get off topic. Let me get back to my Make Vancouver Canadian Again. Okay, so just, yeah, and also the planters. So I have ancestors of the planters. Those were, like, basically pilgrims. Yeah. I have ancestors from all over Canada, including French from Quebec, Irish from Ontario, and Ukrainian from Manitoba. My grandfather fought in World War II, the big one, as Archie Bunker would say. And I was mocked online for saying that. Like, when I first posted this on Twitter, I remember that was one of the things that people attacked. Like, oh, you're quoting Archie Bunker unironically. Okay, yeah, well, Archie Bunker is a big figure of pop culture, and I'm just talking about, and I was referencing him as a symbol of the white working class. Okay. Corrupt politicians have turned Vancouver into a world mecca for money laundering through casinos and real estate. The money never stops pouring in from China, inflating real estate far beyond what local people can afford. Absolutely, right? Absolutely proven. That's the reason why there's a public inquiry going on into this in BC right now. And that public inquiry has come about because of the political raising this issue, okay? It was something that you couldn't even talk about. It took a long time before they got to a public inquiry stage. You couldn't even talk about it for many years due to political correctness. And that's harmed people with the housing crisis. And notice, for anyone who would say that I'm being racist by making this point with China, notice where I locate, like I locate the responsibility in my statement is with the politicians. I said, corrupt politicians have turned Vancouver into a world mecca for money laundering through real estate and casinos. Right. So ultimately the blame would lie with Canadian politicians. So if there's people internationally taking advantage of that situation, I mean, that's not good, but the blame is with our leaders, okay? So I'm not being racist by saying that. Now, Canadians may not have the same constitutional rights as Americans, but we do enjoy the same culture of liberty and freedom of speech and respect for common law and tradition, or at least we used to enjoy it before it came under attack from globalism and political correctness. I descend from the pilgrims and settlers and explorers who built the USA and Canada, beacons of freedom and prosperity in the Western tradition. Right. And there's people who say that I should be ashamed of that. And why should I be? Why should I be ashamed of my ancestors? Okay. And Canada and the USA truly are beacons of freedom and prosperity in the Western tradition. Now, the freedom and the prosperity may be waning in recent years, but that is what the United States in particular has represented historically through the 20th century in particular, that it's this beacon of freedom and prosperity. That's why it's a place that attracts so many immigrants from all around the world, including my ancestors as well. That would be the reason why people have been coming here. Okay, and I have been rendered a serf in my own city and country because a cabal of corrupt politicians decided to sell the land from under my feet to China. Right, and that is not right. Like, I'm speaking to an really profound injustice. And it's not just about me. I'm just an example. I mean, this would have been happening to everyone. Like I said, inflating real estate beyond what local people can afford. So that's basically all local people. Not just me. Not just me. I'm just speaking about myself because I'm not going to be sharing another person's business without getting a signed consent research form or something. You know, like, I'm giving my anecdotal qualitative experience because that's what I can draw upon. But there are many people who have been harmed by the housing crisis in British Columbia. And the international aspect from foreign investment, from China in particular, other countries as well, is only one dimension of it. Okay, there are other factors that go into that as well, that make housing so unaffordable in Vancouver. That's not the only one. So just to say that out of fairness, but I am talking about that, but that doesn't mean that I think that that's the only causal factor. There's many factors, like interest rates. Okay, so going on. And when I tried to speak out about it, they said I was acting entitled. That's in quotations. Literally, that was the wording. I was entitled and racist. And the land never belonged to me in the first place because it is the unceded territory of Salish First Nations who traditionally occupied these lands. Okay, this is what was going on the internet for years when I was trying to raise these issues. I would be called entitled. What makes you think that you would be so entitled to be able to own a home, or even just rent a home, or be able to live in your city where you work and where you lived your whole life and where your family's from? Why should you feel so entitled to that? Well, I think everyone should be entitled. Like, I'm not saying I'm entitled to a mansion or some glorious grand place, but yeah, I think everyone should be entitled to have a roof over their head, in particular when you're working and you do have an income and you could be working your butt off, which I have for most of my life. So, you know, and so yeah, I guess I am entitled, but shouldn't I be? And, and, you know, and also to the left, people think that I'm always coming from the right wing these days, like I'm this huge Trump supporter. That would have been, being called entitled would have been something that right-wing conservatives would have been saying. Like, a lot of this stuff with the housing crisis and was justified by the right wing. Just so you know, like I was fighting the right wing. And being called entitled and racist by the right wing and by the left. And that the land never belonged to me because it belongs to the natives who traditionally lived here. Well, so shouldn't I, like, I'm acknowledging in that sentence right there that the land, that it is the unceded land of the Salish First Nations. So I'm not disputing that when I'm writing this. I'm just saying, yeah, that's the situation. Okay, so where does that leave someone like me? Shouldn't I have a place to belong as well? I mean, it's not like I can go back to Europe. There's no Europe for me to, like, my ancestors have been in North America for 400 years. I have nothing to do with it. Like, shouldn't I have a country and a place to be where I have a valid claim to, like, that I should have a home or that I should be on the receiving end of some social contract? Shouldn't I, like, that's the point that I'm trying to make with that. I'm not trying to take away from Native people, okay? I'm acknowledging that the Salish First Nations, that this is their unceded territory. I'm acknowledging that when I'm saying that. Because it is, like, I'm saying it in the present tense. Yeah. Said I was acting entitled and racist and the land never belonged to me in the first place because it is the unceded territory of Salish First Nations who traditionally occupied these lands. Okay. They said I had no right to country or home. Right? That's the point I'm making, and it's a profound point. They brought in loads of immigrants from all around the world, many from countries that hate each other and continue their battles here in Canada. So, I'm not making a statement against immigrants when I'm saying this, okay? That is the truth, is that when you, there are many people in different parts of this world who don't get along. And when your country is open up to such huge numbers of immigration as Canada is, like 400,000, huge numbers. Canada takes in per capita the highest numbers of immigration, I believe, in the world. If it's not the highest, it's certainly up there. And when you take in, and from all around the world, so many different people from all around the world, these people are not all going to get along with each other. They don't all get along with each other outside of Canada. I mean, it's not about Canada. So that can continue here in Canada. And indeed it has. There's been many examples. The point of this video is not to go into that. I could make a separate video about that. But that's what I'm talking about with that. So, but that doesn't mean to say, because some people read this and think that I'm against immigration or that I'm against immigrants. No. No, I'm not. I'm against it being at such a huge level as it is. And I think there needs to be consideration for the local people and the impacts. So I'm against the approach that's been taken. But that doesn't mean that I am against immigration outright, or that I would have a problem with immigrant people. Absolutely not. Like, I don't have a problem with any people. I'm nice to all people. Okay, like, I'm surrounded by immigrants all the time. So if I was gonna have a problem with immigrants, like, that would be it wouldn't be possible. And my own family. My grandmother is an immigrant from Scotland. So, you know, it's not about being against immigrants per se. It's about getting the policy right and getting the numbers right and being considerate of the impacts on the local population. All right, continuing on. The youngest child in my family is the only white kid in the class and doesn't understand why he can't wear a turban like all the other boys in class. That is true. And I'm trying to speak to a situation. People have a hard time with this one too. And I believe this kid and the kids in this school situation, they've worked it out. So the kids have worked it out. A situation that adults can't even handle talking about. But the kids have been left on their own to work it out. And I guess that struck a chord with me because I know something about what that is like. I have firsthand experience with that. Something like that. Not quite like that. Myself growing up. I wasn't the only white kid in the class, but I would have been one of the only, like I guess I was a minority. And I think among the boys, I remember most of the time I would have been like one of maybe two white boys. Everybody else was Chinese from Hong Kong. So there were no turbans. It's not quite the same thing. Okay, but I understand something about what that is like, and there's also there's an aspect to do with gender and being a boy, right? So to be a boy, part of being a boy in Sikh culture, part of being a man, part of being masculine is to wear a turban. And so if that's your cultural environment, but you cannot wear a turban because of your race, and that's because that's not your culture, that's not your religion, even though that's the predominant environment that you may be in. Well, that's going to make that kid to really feel left out, excluded, and question about maybe about his gender, about like, well, am I really a real boy, a real man? That's the point that I'm driving at there. And the fact that the kids have to deal with it all on their own, and the adults can't even, besides me, can't even handle talking about it or even acknowledging that this is going on. Like, wow. And like, so it's like, so how do you handle that situation? Does the kid wear a turban? Because then he's going to be criticized for cultural appropriation. And a turban, truly, especially when worn by Sikhs, is a religious thing. So if you're not from that religion, like, I don't know, I'm not going to take a stand on that and say you can't wear a turban, but it's not obvious to me that that is the answer. I'm just raising the question, like, what is the answer? Okay, can we talk about this? I don't, like, that's kind of where I'm going with this. Can we, like, talk about it to try to figure out maybe what the answer should be? Okay. So I supported Trump because he is the last chance for the West to push back against this evil globalism. Yeah. Trump will let you at least talk about it. Or he'll go there, you know? So that's the thing, is we need space to talk about these issues. And political correctness is so stifling that you can't talk about it, you can't resolve it, you can't. And that is why I support Maxime Bernier in his courageous stand against the corrupt leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Andrew Scheer, who is a self-described feminist beholden to the dairy industry in Quebec. MAGA, MCGA, MVCA. So this was written in 2018 in a political context. This was written when Maxime Bernier was deciding whether or not to separate from the Conservative Party and create his own new party, which eventually he did do around that time, and then it was called the People's Party of Canada. And I was encouraging Maxime Bernier to do that. And so that was the context that I was writing that in. And to clarify, yeah, so Andrew Scheer, a self-described feminist beholden to the dairy industry in Quebec. I don't necessarily think it's bad to be a feminist. I've sometimes called myself a feminist in the past. I'm not running to be the leader of I'm not the leader of the Conservative Party. There's a difference. Canada doesn't want a feminist to be the leader of the Conservative Party. They want a conservative. That's the point. Okay? So that's not necessarily, like, yeah, I have a big criticism of feminism, but I'm not saying that feminism outright, completely across the board, is wrong. Because I've borrowed from feminist ideology in my thesis. Like, no, it's like I could be a feminist according to some understandings of that word. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing to be a feminist, but I'm just saying, you know, the whole thing, I don't even think Andrew Scheer is a feminist. It's just like he has to call himself that because he wants to check the box of virtue signaling. And that's the point. It's fake. And that's not what Canada needs in our political leaders. So that was the point that I was making there. And that's the reason why I was supporting Maxime Bernier at that time. Okay? This was written in 2018. And it was written in a political context. Obviously, times have changed. I'm not even so much of a big gung-ho Trump supporter anymore because he's really disappointed in many ways. So, although I'm still sympathetic to the MAGA movement, the people in it widely, broadly speaking, I'm not really out campaigning for Trump. Okay? But I did at the time, and I'm unrepentant of it, and I think that people should be allowed to wear MAGA hats without being attacked. You know, I was appalled at the violence that I saw coming from the left at that time, and I've always been somebody who's walked away from violence, do not stand for violence at all, and so anytime a situation goes violent, I'm out of there. And that was a pushing factor for me to walk away from the left. Because before all this, I was supporting the NDP and leftist parties my whole life. Okay? So, that's the situation. And everything I'm writing in that thing, Make Vancouver Canadian Again, is true. And I'm talking about Make It Canadian Again also in case sometimes people think I mean Make It White Again. That's not what I'm saying, because it was never an all-white city. There's always been Chinese people living in Vancouver and New Westminster since the 1800s, when my ancestors were here, and Native people. Okay, so why would I be thinking to make it white again? Like, that wouldn't even make sense because it was never an all-white city. And if you're thinking that by me saying Make Vancouver Canadian Again means that I'm saying make it white again, that means that you think that being Canadian is equated to being white. That's not what I'm saying, okay? I'm talking about Canadian in the sense of culture, of a Western liberal, in the classical sense of the word, a Western classical liberal culture. That's what I mean by Canadian. Okay, so freedom of speech would be a huge core Canadian value. I'm talking about Canadian values. And I'm also talking about, there's a subtext to this because I'm talking also about the foreign ownership from Chinese investors of the real estate. So literally owned by Canadians. Okay, because when your city, so much of your city is owned by people on the other side of the planet, just as an investment, well, that, we've seen how that really creates a devastating situation for people living here of all races in terms of housing. So, and when I wrote this, I believed that, like, it's not just housing, it was also commercial real estate. So, Anbang Insurance, which is the state-owned insurance company of China, owned by the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing, owned the Bentall Towers in Vancouver, which would be the main office towers in Vancouver. They essentially owned the downtown business district in Vancouver when I wrote this. The government of China did. So, yeah, Make Vancouver Canadian Again in terms of its culture and values, and literally in terms of who is owning it. That is what I mean by that. It's not about being racist or to say that it should be an all-white city or make it white again. That's not what I was saying. It wouldn't make sense to say that because it was never an all-white city. Okay? And so that's it. And I don't deserve the absolute hate and pushback that I have received. I don't deserve, well, pushback is one thing, but I don't deserve the hate and intolerance and discrimination and censorship that I have experienced as a large part of writing this. This has been a large part of it. So that's my little explanation. Not so little. This is 32 minutes. I better wrap this up. I'm starting to get hungry now. That's my explanation of what the thinking process was behind when I wrote Make Vancouver Canadian Again in 2018. All right. Peace out, everyone. Have a good day.